Hi everybody, my name is Claire Copeland. I'm a consultant geriatrician in NHS Forth Valley, which is in Scotland, and I'm delighted to be able to spend some time with you talking about delirium and management. Now, when I was asked by Krish and other colleagues would I do a presentation for World Delirium Day, I was kind of humming and hawing a bit about it. And it's a Scottish colloquial way of saying I was debating what to talk about. And it then occurred to me it's been around about 10 years, which is quite astonishing, to think about my involvement in the delirium world more as a concentrated and focused subspecialty interest. So I thought this would be a good time to maybe share some of my reflections, some of the learning, and maybe ask some questions at the end about where do we go now with delirium. So first up, full disclosure, you may be expecting a talk on the management of delirium from the perspective of pharmacological and non-pharmacological treatments. And if that's what you were hoping for, this is not the talk for you. What I thought might be interesting is to think about it from a more different aspect. So when I talk about management, I'm thinking about clinical management and leadership, to think about more strategic planning and operational delivery, which is a bit of a highfalutin way of basically saying how can we get delirium care management embedded more within healthcare settings, wherever that might be. It might be hospital, it might be care home, whatever it is, in a more organisational approach. So, thinking a bit about where it all began, I'm going to, over the next probably 10 minutes or so, take you a wee journey over the last 10 years. So, self-indulgent a little bit, I think, but with a lot of good learning, I hope, a lot of reflections, and we'll see where that takes us. So I suppose the first thing I've put, where did it start? It started with a management meeting. Now I was a newly qualified consultant. I was working in a different health board, and we were sitting around at our weekly management meeting when our clinical director had said that there had been a complaint come in from a family who were, amongst other things, unhappy with the care that their loved one received regards delirium. And the question had been raised, was there a pathway, a set of guidelines or whatever, that we could share with them to say that that's what we did in this particular health board? And we all sort of looked around and went, is there? I'm not actually very sure. So then typically what followed was maybe we should have a look at that. And that was the beginning of my involvement. Now, in terms of how we then approached that, I think it would be fair to say that sometimes when a question like that is put in a clinical management meeting, there's an element of, dare I say it, tick box exercising. And what do I mean by that? I mean, well, go away, have a look, find the answer, and we'll send that back, and that's probably good enough. At the time, I remember thinking that actually isn't good enough, and perhaps maybe what we ought to do is something a little bit more sustainable and a wee bit more, future-proof. I was stuck on a word there. We'll stick with sustainable. So I thought about it in a kind of, one of those acorns and trees things, from little acorns grow great trees. And that's probably fair in terms of where the work has taken us today. So in order to help investigate things a bit further, I decided to rally the troops, and one of those is a Delirium Superhero that you will be very familiar with, our colleague AJ, who's now in Australia. And AJ at that time worked as liaison old age psychiatry, and we recruited some other people we thought might be interested, so our dementia nurse consultant, some improvement advisors, and we set about having a look to see, did we have a pathway, And what did that mean? Well, it meant, did we have a tool for the identification of delirium? Maybe not so much. People were using the 4AMT, which, as we know, is not a test for delirium. So we embedded the 4AT. We started to embed the time bundle, which is a management tool to look for were there any modifiable risk factors, etc. And we did a couple of tests of change in a few wards in the 2 hospitals in our health board. And it seemed to go quite well. People started to get interested and we were feeling pretty pleased. However, like most things, when you think perhaps at the surface that's what the problem is, this was a relative complaint, we'd found a pathway, actually what it did was unearth many other layers. And I refer to that as, when I'm being polite, the onion. You can think about what the layers might be within that particular onion. But what I mean more specifically was it started to unearth. It wasn't just about this particular case. This was a whole cultural thing where people were using a lot of different names and euphemisms to talk about delirium, but not calling it delirium. We weren't consistently using a robust screening tool. So we weren't using the 4AT, we weren't using the CAM. There were pockets, by the way, of good practice, so I'm not completely trash talking. There were issues around the legislation, around about people who didn't have capacity, mental capacity, sorry, during their episode of delirium. So we set about rewriting, with support from the Mental Welfare Commission, the paperwork and in Scotland that's referred to as the Adults with Incapacity Act. So we did that, and as we were going along, we were getting more and more of our workforce, particularly our nurses, really interested in how do I identify delirium, what do I do about it, and how come mostly I've never heard about this before. I've heard about dementia, they're confused people, paraphrasing things that have been said to me over the years, but this delirium business, I don't really understand it. So as we were kind of going along in terms of a key part of management is about how you communicate. And at that time we were doing this quite intensive, resource heavy, one-to-one small group teaching around about delirium. So we needed to expand the message. We needed to get that out there so that everybody would know what delirium management was all about. So that's where social media came in. And what I had observed with particularly our sort of junior colleagues, our nurses, was that if you weren't able to get them for teaching, say on a ward basis or in the lecture theatre, they were quite on their breaks or in the canteen, see them scrolling down on social media and in particular Facebook. So flying slightly below the radar of our comms department, we set up the Delirium Facebook page, which then evolved in time into the Scottish Delirium Association Facebook page. We use Twitter, hence chirpy chirpy tweet tweet, which is also a song, and that might be a little kind of, what do they call them, earworms or something. So there is a song from the 60s, I believe, that has that, but anyway, we use Twitter to start connecting with people, not just locally, but suddenly the whole country was expanded, and then in time across the world, where we were sharing good practice, we were learning from each other. We also used Vine. You might remember Vine. These were short videos on a loop. My teenage daughter tells me that's what TikTok is now, but I'll be honest, I haven't really figured out TikTok. But in essence, what we were doing was expanding to get more communication out around about what delirium was, and to raise awareness at that time, as well as help with the management of it. And so that kind of grassroots groundswell began to grow and grow. And we then became aware that actually, importantly, you need to make a bigger noise. How could we get much more attention? Because although we were getting a lot of, as I was saying, grassroots on the floor, the higher echelons, if you like, of organisational management still hadn't really taken on board that delirium was as big a problem. You know, about 1 in 5 people in the hospital with it, or over the age of 65 in the hospital, associated with falls, increased length of stay, amongst other things, increased rates of institutionalisation, meaning going into a care home. And actually, somehow there was still this disconnect between if we managed delirium better, you would have really better outcomes on the other side. So with that disconnect, using my hands around the place, we decided to try and create a bigger noise. How else could we influence that? And that was around about the time where Healthcare Improvement Scotland, or HIS as we refer to them in Scotland, which is supported by Scottish Government, and that's to promote awareness, support, quality improvement around certain conditions. And at the time, fortuitously, frailty was one and delirium was another one. And they really did help support hospitals through doing tests of change around how really to embed delirium assessment and management. So you would get things like these produced, which were posters, we had leaflets. My biggest claim to fame, and perhaps the peak of my career thus far, was getting the poo emoji on a Scottish Government backed poster. Good times, good times. We created a bit of controversy along the way with, and you'll see on the right hand side, there's a tombstone where it talks about delirium can be fatal. And this really caught the attention of people who hadn't appreciated that there was a mortality association with delirium. And people really got quite rattled at the time to suggest that we were making comparisons with delirium with things like cardiovascular disease, cancer treatments. But we felt strongly about it and we left it on the posters. So we were getting now the attention more nationally in Scotland from an organisation that could start to influence at board level, chief exec, boards, medical directors, nurse directors, etc. Along with that was the development of another really important guideline, which was the SIGN guidelines. You might have heard of them. It's a uniquely Scottish thing, although our kind of partners in NHS England, the NICE guidelines as well. So SIGN, it is a bit of a, well, I say a bit of it was a huge achievement to get the SIGN guidelines developed, because these within Scotland are used by boards across the way as benchmarking our services. It's a quality assurance mechanism, and health boards within Scotland are duty bound to use these types of guidelines to say, how are we doing? What evidence are you doing around audit, quality improvement, education and training, governance? So this was another mechanism around about trying to influence at a wider strategic level around about delirium. I've put up there a bit about the British Geriatric Society, which you may have heard as well. I'm the Vice President for workforce in there, and I'm involved in sharing and producing work around delirium along with many other colleagues within the delirium world. And what we're hoping to do there, or rather what's in development there, is first of all an e-module, which will be a practical tool for people to go to learn and be assessed on their understanding and knowledge about delirium, and hopefully use it as a form of accreditation that you can use for your continuous professional development. There's the Delirium Hub as well, so not trying to reinvent the wheel with a British Geriatrics spin, more really to signpost off to all the amazing resources that are already out there in terms of delirium care. Now, British Geriatric Society is as it sounds, but importantly, it's a relatively big organisation. It's a multidisciplinary organisation, and it attracts both UK and international attention in terms of people coming through the website. So again, it's another big player in the trying to spread the word about delirium, more importantly, in a practical way, so that people have got the tools to be able to take that back to their place of work, whether that's, again, within NHS healthcare, whether that's in the private sector, in social care. Some of you will know that one of my big passions in terms of medicine and career thus far is around about education. Education to me is the planting seeds in terms of influencing culture change, and from a managerial perspective, it goes hand in hand with everything from a clinical governance point of view. So to my mind, clinical governance is all about quality assurance. How do you get quality assurance? Well, that's if you know that people, for whatever it is, and obviously we're talking about delirium, have got the tools, the resources, the education to know about certain conditions, whether it's delirium, cancer, heart disease, etc. So I've already spoken about at local level, where we're doing a lot of small group teaching. There's the junior doctor teaching in the more kind of traditional lecture theatre style. There's simulation training as well, which is an increasingly popular mechanism for all sorts of teaching, but it lends itself very well to the teaching of delirium. Part of that planting seeds I was referring to in culture change, I believe, starts as early as humanly possible. In relation to healthcare, that's in your undergraduate programs. That's about embedding it into curriculums so that actually we can improve, not just, as I say, the kind of quantitative, if you like, or I can't think of the nuts and bolts of delirium education. What is it? What causes it? How do you manage it? But more importantly, the cultural aspect of that in terms of how frightening it can be. What can you do? Like the importance of it in terms of understanding that somebody, the longer they have a delirium, the more likely they are to go on and develop cognitive impairment later. They may not get home again. They may end up in a care home, stuff like that. And we've published work on an undergraduate curriculum in age and aging, and other colleagues I've been extremely fortunate to work with over the years, Andy Teodrich, James Fisher, to name two, continue this work on around about embedding it into educational programmes around the world. We have the Scottish Delirium conferences every year, again multidisciplinary, to try and again have a more focused annual review of all things delirium. And again, making it practical, for people to take it back to their place of work. And that place of work may be in the hospital, and I've put there care homes. And care home education and care home experience of delirium can be quite different to that we see in the hospitals. So with all that said, there's a sense that, is there still a bit of a ceiling effect? We've done all of this amazing work in terms of our education, our social media presence, our influencing national policy from a healthcare point of view for older people. And to me, in recent years, probably the last couple of years, I've still felt that disconnect, albeit it's got smaller, but it still feels like when you're back within the hospital setting, whether you're in social care settings, there's still that bit of a but they're not quite intertwined is what I was meaning there. My world these days, having been appointed fairly recently in the last month or so to Associate Medical Director for Integration, which is a new role within the place that I work at. It's a relatively new role generally, I would say. For those of you out with the UK, we talk a lot about health and social care as being integrated, and I've put the slide there really to demonstrate what we're talking about. I would suggest that within the delirium world, sort of fell over my word there, we've been doing this for years. Maybe not so much the finance part, but all of that other integrated, joined up working across the whole healthcare spectrum. And I include our academics and our scientists and our researchers all the way through the clinical application in healthcare and all the way into kind of private social care, third sector. We've been working together to help improve the care and management of the person with delirium. And this is very much the platform that I'm going to be using to put delirium front and centre in my own place of work, so that actually instead of talking about how we manage delirium in the hospital, we talk about that whole system approach to it. What is the right thing for that person and what could and should we be doing better for them? So it does rather feel like at this point I've come full circle from when I first was involved with delirium, from sitting as a newly qualified consultant in that management meeting saying, yeah, that's fine, we'll go and have a look and see where our pathways are, to now having a platform for more of that strategic planning and operational delivery for for delirium. And for some of you watching this, and I would put myself in this a few years ago, when we talk about healthcare management, sometimes it can be a wee bit cynical. It can be a wee bit disengaged. It can be, what's the agenda? What's the bias going on here? That, I guess, as well, thinking about it from a private healthcare system, and also thinking that, you know, the other perspective or other different type of healthcare systems around the world, you know, there's that kind of means if I go into management, I've sold out. I'm not really a clinician anymore. And I guess really what I wanted to say in this presentation was, don't view it like that. Try not to. I realise everyone's probably had a degree of experience, different experiences, but I'm reminded of a Michelle Obama quote. I love Michelle Obama. And she talked about, when it comes to change and influencing change, that don't be so cynical to not have a seat at the table. Change will carry on regardless of whether you're there. I'm paraphrasing it slightly, but the gist of it means, as you probably gathered, if you have the opportunity to be sat at the table influencing decisions at whatever level, you should be. Otherwise, all that tends to happen is decisions are made, and not always the right ones, maybe made with the best of intentions, but they're not always the right ones. And if you have the opportunity to influence that, and from a delirium perspective, we should and could be doing better, then absolutely. So this is what I refer to as my playground now. It's not really a playground, but what I mean by that is suddenly I have this landscape in front of me. Well, not suddenly, it's always been there, but I am now part of the team that's looking at what could we do for that person with delirium, whether they're in their own home, whether they're in the hospital, and what do we need to wrap around that person that goes the whole system to make that person's experience better, and not just the person, but the carers and the relatives. What can we do? What should we be doing that is a joined up, integrated, whole system approach to the person with delirium? So I'm going to leave you with this, and this is from a blog I wrote probably about 10 years ago. It was probably about the time in that meeting. And when I came across it, I was a bit like, am I going to be a bit like, oh, what did she know? Oh my goodness, she's so whatever. And actually, I would say it's still the same. It might got better words, maybe articulating it a little bit better, but that sentence of it's about being told that'll never happen and ignoring it anyway is still very much something that I live and breathe by. So if you have the opportunity, you have a role in terms of leadership, you have a role in terms of management, you have a role to influence and affect change. hopefully what my talk has demonstrated is there's no one thing to do. There's an array of different things. Use your skills, use your talents, and use the timing, you know, because it depends where you are at what time that you'll be able to apply those skills. But don't just sit and watch it all happen and get involved. I'm going to leave it there. If anyone is interested in having a bit more chat with me about that, I love to chat. I'm talking very slowly today, but I'm trying to rein it in because I get very passionate about delirium care. And I just want to say thank you to all, everybody along the way that's helped with all of this, and to keep up the great work that everyone's doing. Thank you.